Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And I am happy to be on here with Paula Hawkins and Lee Child to celebrate the release of A Slow Fire Burning. I know that we did this as a multi-store event, so I want to welcome not just the customers from Murder by the Book, but also customers from Watermark Books and Left Bank Books who are on here as well today. In case you tune in late and you miss something, we'll have a recording available up on YouTube in about a month, and we'll be sending out, at least to the Murder by the Book people, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of the event in case you have to come and go. So without any further ado, though, let me go ahead and introduce our authors. So Paula Hawkins is the author of the #1 New York Times bestselling novels Into the Water and Girl on the Train, an international #1 bestseller. The Girl on the Train has sold 23 million copies worldwide and has been adapted into a major motion picture. Hawkins was born in Zimbabwe and now lives in London. And as I mentioned, her new book is A Slow Fire Burning, and we do have signed copies of that available if you're interested in ordering. Hi, Paula. How are you?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I'm very well, thank you. Sorry, I had to unmute myself there.
It's not a Zoom meeting without someone having to unmute themselves. So there you go. It's so good to see you. As you might remember, we had you for Girl on the Train early on, and
Into the Water. I was there, I think, in 2017. I'm sure
you were with Megan Abbott for
that is right, exactly,
your second book. Yeah. And as always, it's wonderful to be chatting with Lee Child. Hi, Lee.
Hi, McKenna. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So Lee Child is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Jack Reacher thrillers and the complete Jack Reacher short story collection, No Middle Name. All of his novels have been optioned for major motion pictures, including Jack Reacher and Jack Reacher Never Go Back. A native of England and a former television director, Child lives in New York City and has graciously volunteered to do the interview this afternoon. So I can't wait to just sit back and listen to this talk. For those of you watching, if you have any questions, you can put comments and things in the live chat, but the easiest thing is if you have questions, there's actually a question and answer tab. You can go ahead and put a question in there, and that way I can moderate those in the second half of the talk. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and hide my video and mute myself and sit back and watch. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, McKenna.
Thank you, McKenna. I got to say, there's nothing gracious about me volunteering to do this interview. I couldn't wait. It's one of those things. Paula and I share a publisher in the UK, and there is nothing more passionate or exciting than when a publisher knows that they've got some great thing. And I remember hearing that years ago about The Girl on the Train. There was a sort of excitement in the building that was unmistakable. And of course, then we all read it and loved it. And now we're on the third book. And by now we actually share an editor as well.
You did.
Sarah, yeah. And I remember pestering Sarah, when is it? When can I see it? When can I see it? And A Slow Fire Burning, they sent to me in January. But of course, because it's a big deal book, there were all kinds of security measures around it. And I was basically told that if I talked about it, my head would explode, or I would be assassinated or something. So I've spent 8 months not talking about it. And so now finally we get a chance to talk about it. And there's a lot to talk about. Many layers. Of course, the suspense layers we can't talk about because otherwise we'll screw it up. But there's still plenty. So hi, Paula. So good to see you. Sorry we can't be doing this shoulder to shoulder actually on the stage.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for doing this. It's absolutely wonderful. It's wonderful to see you. I guess you're in New York, yes?
Actually, I'm in Colorado right now.
Oh, are you? Oh, how nice. Yeah, I wish I could be over there doing a proper tour, but here we are.
How has it been for you the last year and a half? I'm always really interested about, did writers even notice a difference, because we're so solitary anyway.
Yeah, to be honest, I've had a very easy go of it, really. Obviously, I was in the middle of writing the novel when everything locked down, so it was quite good for me work-wise. I don't have children, so I didn't have to do any of that homeschooling stuff. So compared to everyone else, I just had the easiest time. Sorry.
Do you think you would ever go on to write about pandemic and lockdown and so on?
I really don't. I would. I mean, I think there is probably a great lockdown novel to be written, but I don't think I'm the person who's going to write it. I think we'll probably all have to reflect on how it's got into us. There'll be lots of interesting sort of side effects, I think, and psychological issues that come out of it and all that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people had a really traumatic time, and so that's going to play out for a while. But for me, no, I don't want to do a lockdown novel. I think there's a high concept lockdown novel to be written, but it's not going to be me.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it either. It's a strange thing. I mean, it was so massive and so disruptive and so awful for so many people. But, you know, where's the story? I think it's really significant in that the 1918 flu, which was the previous huge one, doesn't really show up in fiction hardly at all.
It's completely true, isn't it? That there are no great books about that. There's so many great books about that period, obviously mostly the war and what happened afterwards. But the flu kind of gets brushed under the carpet. Yeah,
it really does. And that, to me, means maybe people are so sick of suffering it, they certainly don't want to read about it.
I think you're right.
So we'll see. So my first question I want to go way back to the beginning here, which is that I presume by some accident of your parents' employment or something, you were not born in the UK.
Actually, it wasn't just their employment. My parents, my dad was actually born in England, but was taken out to what was then Southern Rhodesia as a child. His father, so my grandfather, was an engineer on the railways in Southern Africa. So I'm only second generation. My mum was born in South Africa, but then also moved to, as it was, Rhodesia when she was a child. So I'm second generation Zimbabwean, sort of. My parents still live there. It's what they know as home. It's always been their home, yeah.
So in your early life, did you have a feeling that the UK, or England specifically, London, was the mother country that you were observing from afar? Did you have that feeling?
Not really. No, we didn't have that feeling of being expats. We were Zimbabweans, and that's where we were living. When I was 17, my parents decided to go to England but it was only for a short time. They were there for a year and a half or so. My dad was doing some work in the UK. He's an academic. But it was never their plan to stay forever. They then went back. I finished my schooling, got into university, stayed, got a job in London, and just never went back because just mostly for career reasons. I didn't want to go back.
I think what I certainly detect in A Slow Fire Burning, apart from loads of other things, is a sort of fascination and curiosity and affection for London and its neighborhoods and its lifestyle that I think is got to be partially created by the fact that at some point you were new to it. It didn't just evolve day to day. And I feel the same thing being in the US. You know, it's always new and exciting and fresh, and nothing can be taken for granted, and you're always learning everything. So I think that really shows through. And presumably that also helped in your previous career as a journalist, that you were seeing things with a fresh eye and not with the baked-in assumptions that a lot of other people would.
I think that's absolutely true. Yes, I moved here as a teenager. I was 17, 18. And it was quite a culture shock, and it was such a different way of living here. That where I lived in Zimbabwe, Harare was quite suburban, and here I was suddenly in the heart of a huge, incredibly vibrant, multicultural city. And there are all these weird little neighborhoods of London, and the one I write about in A Slow Fire Burning is a particular one. So there's Regent's Canal runs right the way through the city, and there's these little houseboats. People live on these houseboats, and around that you have these quite grand Victorian houses, and you also have tower blocks of council tenants. And so it's all this like amazing mishmash. It's really vibrant and interesting. But I do think you're absolutely right that coming to a city with an outsider's eye is really useful. And I think, although I've lived in London on and off now, because I'm quite old, you still have a slightly that outsiderish eye, and you look at things in a slightly different way.
I really picked up on that, yeah, and it's really one of the strengths of the book. There is this affection and fascination, and that's a particularly specific subculture. The people that live on boats on the Regent's Canal. That I suppose other world cities have the same thing. I mean, New York, not really. There's a few people living on boats, but it's not the same thing at all. And it is very particular and very meaningful for, it's an entire lifestyle all its own.
I think it is. And the weird thing is it's actually changed a lot, because it used to be kind of, I think, sort of an alternative lifestyle, lots of hippies. And then because London is so expensive, now you find it's just people who are like looking for a slightly cheaper place to be, and it's actually massively gentrified, weirdly. But it retains some of that sort of that like alternative lifestyle ethos to it. There are certainly people who still want to maintain that lifestyle. So it's an odd thing where it's a kind of slightly separate community right in the heart of the city.
So to turn to the actual book itself, again, a deep early question. I escaped the fate of having a massive hit with my first book. It, built up gradually, incrementally over many years, whereas your first book was, of course, a massive, astonishing success. And I'm always curious how that makes you feel for the second and third and subsequent books. Was it a confidence booster, or was it a burden, or how did it feel?
Well, I should point out, actually, that I wrote 4 books under a pseudonym before I wrote The Girl on the Train. So I had plenty of non-successful experience before I got to The Girl on the Train. But it was the first book I wrote under my own name, The Girl on the Train, and it was, as you say, it was huge. And that had, well, I'm glad it didn't happen to me when I was 25, because I think that would have been really hard. I was already into my 40s, so I don't know why that's important, but to me it felt important that I'd already lived a bit. I didn't think, oh, this is what life is going to be like. Everything's going to be easy and just land on my lap. Quite the contrary, because I'd struggled quite a bit up to that point. It was, but it wasn't, and it was quite an extraordinary thing to happen, because it was quite overwhelming and quite daunting. And yes, so like 90% joyful experience, 10% terrifying is how I think it would happen. And it did create a whole load of other pressures on the second book, which I'm not sure I dealt with that well, but I don't know how you do. I was constantly touring. I had no time to write. I had no time to think. So writing the third book has been for me, I think, a much better experience. It took me a long time, but I was able to sort of be quiet, reflective, think, do all the things that you kind of need to do as a novelist to get it written. And I didn't have all that craziness in my head that I had from the Girl on the Train.
Yeah, the 3 of them then under the Hawkins name are somewhat different one from the other. You obviously don't feel that you're trapped into a lane. You feel that you can go wherever you're interested.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's partly a result of having a success, is it does free you up in some ways. I didn't feel like, well, I never felt like I wanted to do the same thing again and again. I said that. A lot of people were like, well, could you do like The Girl on the Train too? But I really don't know how that would work. For me, I had no interest in repeating that. And as I say, I don't know how I would. So I wanted to go off on different pieces. There are a lot of the themes that I write about. Women's place in society, the way women judge each other, the way women are judged, that sort of feeling of how outsiders live in a community, problems around how we remember things, how we tell stories about ourselves, all those things recur. There's a lot of thematic similarities between the books. But yes, they're not all. The Girl on the Train had a very sort of strong concept, whereas the others have sort of meandered maybe a little bit more.
Well, let's not call it that. I think there was, again, a common thread would be the love of the detailed landscape. Because the thing that initially struck me most about The Girl on the Train, is that phenomenon that 10 million English people experience, which is taking the train to work and you go past everybody's backyard. In England, you would call it the back garden, or a pocket handkerchief back garden, one after the other, hundreds and hundreds of them. And they have, the little deck or patio that they've built from watching the television. And then they have the garden shed and the back fence over which they throw stuff. And it's something so quotidian and yet ultimately so fascinating that I felt that Girl on the Train just evolved spontaneously. You must have been on a train and just started daydreaming about it.
I did lots of those kind of journeys because everyone always wants to know which journey that is on the Girl on the Train. It isn't one journey, there are so many journeys. I did lots of those kind of journeys. And the other thing about, English trains and overground is that they break down all the time. So you do spend a lot of your time sitting there waiting for the train to move again. And in a lot of circumstances, you are looking right into somebody's window and you can actually see what's going on. And I spent a lot of time hoping that something interesting was going to happen, because this was, when I was first thinking about it, this was pre-mobile phone. Okay, you might have a book or a newspaper to read, but it was a lot of daydreaming and a lot of imagining the lives of people who lived in different places. And that's how most of my novels start, I think, is like dreaming myself into situations. I think it's Led by Burning. A lot of it started with me walking along the canal, sort of looking into these houseboats that I was walking past and wondering about who might be inside, who might live there, what might be going on in there. I have that kind of nosiness that is essential for a novelist, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you said nosiness rather than leaving it for me to say. But yeah, absolutely, that's what it's all about. I'm totally fascinated. I love looking in people's windows and trying to explain to myself what's going on. And I do it if I'm terrible for doing it when I'm on vacation. If I'm at a hotel in a resort, I tell myself the entire biography of all the fellow guests. And of course, most of it will be utterly wrong, but it's very somehow satisfying to supply backstory to people that you just glimpse. And I guess that's the key to being a novelist, that you have the same experiences and the same sights that everybody else has, but you make something out of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of character development comes from that. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone you see, but it's that supplying of backstory, I think, is really interesting, because I do that. I mean, I don't think consciously, but it's how characters start for me. I'll read about something in the newspaper or hear a snippet of a conversation I heard about, as a friend of mine told me about someone she knew who'd been in an accident and had some personality changes. And that for me definitely was the sort of genesis of the character of Laura in A Slow Fire Burning, because I started to think, well, how would that be to be like that? What would that do to your life? How would it be to sort of navigate the world when you have this? Basically, she has a condition called disinhibition, which means she sort of has no filter. She says things that that we oughtn't to say in polite society. She loses her temper quickly. She behaves in sort of unpredictable ways. And I was just thinking, what is it like to live like that? This is not your fault. It's not something you can control, but you're constantly sort of being buffeted by the world because of this condition. So I think that's a huge part of how my characters start, is looking at people. They might be in hotel bars, or it might just be a snippet of a story I've been told, and then supplying backstory and also looking forward to where they might end up.
Yeah, it is. So you must have walked past those boats on the canal, and the seed started. And the other question that arose from reading it was, it seemed to pay tremendous respect to the genre as a whole. It seemed to me, and I really want to know this, it seemed to me, here's a person who knows and enjoys the genre, and it was like writing a sonnet or something that has a certain amount of fixed form. Is that true, or have I made that up completely?
I mean, It is true. It is true. I don't feel like I'm one of those people who has read everything in the genre. I know there are certain people who will have read the canon completely, and I'm not that person. But I do love crime fiction, and I do sometimes feel a bit defensive about it, or about actually most genre fiction. I think there's so much good stuff that is overlooked, so much really, really beautifully written, clever, really sort of important stuff that is written that is genre fiction that is often skated over, overlooked because it's somehow not worthy of the sort of critical attention that literary fiction might get. So I was thinking, I mean, obviously, because of the situation I've been thinking a lot about what it is to write and to be read and to be published and to be criticized, and all those things were going around in my head. And I was thinking a lot about the sorts of crime fiction that I've loved, and you know what it is to do it well, what it is to do it badly. All those kind of conversations were sort of thoughts were going around in my head, and I wanted to get all of that into the book. So there's a novel within a novel, which is he's a literary writer who tries his hand at crime fiction, as I think some literary writers do, without really, and think it's going to be easy. And it's not easy. It's not necessarily easy. Any kind of novel is hard to write. And yeah, I think you sort of ignore the conventions of something and the rich history of something at your peril.
Yeah, and that's the feeling I got from A Slow Fire Burning, that it's like a sonata or something. It starts with an emphatic chord saying, yeah, this is a London crime novel with the tremendous scenario at the beginning. And then it is partially a whodunit, but mostly a whydunit. And that is where the fascination comes in. Because we know, according to the way the story evolves, and also according to the genre convention, there's a small group of potential suspects. We know it's going to be one of a handful. And the question, therefore, is, okay, who exactly? But much more than that, why? And it's the why that is so fascinating. And that powers the narrative engine, I think, throughout the whole book. So obviously that's what you are exploring there, the reasons that stretch decades in the characters' life stories. What would produce this result?
Yeah, that's absolutely the thing that intrigues me most about crime. It's not the act itself, and it's not the procedure that goes into solving it. It's that how did we get to this point? How on earth did these ostensibly quite ordinary people, they're not in the criminal fraternity, they're not psychopaths, they're just everyday people whose lives have been derailed in some way, perhaps a big way, perhaps a small way, but they've ended up going off on a different piece. And so, yeah, what I'm really interested in is how you get to this point. And I think that the sort of underlying thing that I'm always thinking about is, how would I be if I was in this situation? Would I do that? How far would I go? Well, how far would any of us go? That sort of, it's very sort of tantalizing to me. That, I mean, that's maybe the wrong word, but that idea of how one might behave in extremes. So that's what the novel is always asking, like, how on earth do you get to this point, and how far would you go with that?
And what would be your personal answers? I mean, how far would you go? Because
I hope never to discover. I really hope never to discover, because all of the characters in this novel have suffered something pretty terrible. They've either suffered a tragic loss, or a physical trauma, or in one case, a brutal assault. So everyone has had something really unpleasant happen in their past, deeply, deeply unpleasant, the kind of thing that we hope most of us will never have to suffer through. So, yeah, it's me imagining myself. So I could supply you with an answer, but it's probably not a true answer, because I don't think one can ever know until one's in that situation. But I'm constantly sort of speculating about where it might lead you, and also how different responses to trauma and tragedy take us in different directions. Do you focus on forgiveness, or do you focus on revenge, or do you focus on healing? What do you cut the people that you love out of your life, or do you turn towards them? It's all those sort of different sort of strategies that people employ or don't employ when something terrible happens to them.
Yeah, I'm firmly in the revenge camp.
I thought you might be.
And that was crucial for me, really, as a writer, because in previous years, in my last job, I'd be in some horrendous meeting, or there'd be trouble brewing about something, and I would be fantasizing about taking the manager out, But on a serious level, how would I do it exactly? What sort of pubs could you go to and find the right guys and give them £100 and have them deal with it? How would you do that in an untraceable fashion? And I was just obsessed with all the details. And I think that in a sense that taught me to plot, or taught me to figure things out. But yeah, I'm huge on revenge. Never forgive, never forget. That's what I say.
Well, I think this book obviously is very, very much a book about revenge. I think it's interesting that you say that you were so obsessed about the details, because I think it's one of the very difficult things about writing crime now is getting those. It's quite hard to get away with killing someone these days. I sometimes, I think crime writers and indeed criminals had it a lot easier 30, 40 years ago without CCTV and mobile phones everywhere, didn't they?
They certainly did. And especially in London, which is, I believe, still the most surveilled city in the world.
I think so.
I'm sure it's slightly out of date, but I read a while ago that fully 25% of the world's CCTV cameras are in London.
Oh, wow, really? Yeah, I need to start committing crime somewhere else, don't I? Really?
Yeah, and the mobile phone thing is good in some ways. I had a tax dispute about where I had been living for a particular period of a year, and normally that would be difficult to figure out. But they just said, "Well, send us your mobile phone records," and that gets that solves the problem. But of course, from the criminal's point of view, it's not such a good result.
No, not good.
Yeah. So what was actually the hardest thing about writing A Slow Fire Burning? You said it took a long time. And that is, in a way, a luxury that we don't often have with the delivery schedules that we're presented with. But I often debate with myself, is it a good idea or a bad idea to take longer than you normally would? How did you feel about that?
Well, what I think I struggled with at the beginning of the novel was just finding I had the characters. I had Laura, who's sort of the heart of the story, this damaged young woman. I knew I wanted to write about her. It was a question of finding the right story. And this is often the way I approach novels. I start with character. As I got on the train, I had Rachel in my head for a long time before I actually wrote the book. I knew that I wanted to write about this person. I knew what her particular problems were. I knew her psychology, but I just couldn't find the right story. And so that it was, in this case, it was a case of sort of writing my way into the novel. I tried a few different sort of angles, chucked them out, started again. And so here there are sort of three women. There's Laura, Carla, and Miriam are at the heart of the book. And it was choosing how these people should interact in the best way, choosing the relationships that they were going to have with each other, when they were going to meet, and how their paths would cross. And once I had that sort of structure, then I was into it. But it did take me a long time to find the right way for that to happen. I think one of the problems I often have is I do have a lot of ideas. It's just picking the one that's going to work in this situation. It's picking the right story, the right way to tell the story.
Yeah, that's one of the questions we always get: where to get your ideas? As if that is difficult. It's actually the reverse, as you just said. Ideas are 10 a penny. Which 2 or 3 are you going to invest in and combine for this year's work? And that is actually the skill, is choosing the ideas rather than finding them. And of course, obviously, 3 women that are, you sense that, one of them did it, and you can't really blame any of them. They're suffering from the hangover of their past. But women in general, what a great thing is happening at the moment in crime fiction. It's just getting stronger and stronger. Not only women authors, but women characters are genuinely now actually far more fascinating than the men characters. And do you have a sense that this is something that has waited a long time to emerge? Do you feel that even though women have been the mainstay of crime fiction really for a century, are we changing our era now where it is much more possible and practical to have real women on the page as opposed to this kind of fake women that we used to have?
Yeah, and I think there has been a real shift away from. There was a time at which, there were certain kinds of women that you found in crime fiction, and they were victims often, femme fatale, or they were just a really good girl somewhere. And we've moved to a point where we allow ourselves to write. People constantly talk to me about the fact that I write flawed characters and unlikable characters. The flawed thing I find kind of odd, because isn't everyone flawed? Do we know any flawed people? That's for me is writing a three-dimensional person. Messed up, but you go to extremes in fiction, don't you? And the whole likability issue drives me crazy, because I don't think I go to fiction you don't go to fiction to make friends. You go to fiction to find people who are compelling and who are likely to get into conflict, who are likely to take you to interesting places. That's sort of what we go to fiction for. But I do think, yes, that we are now seeing much more real. They don't have to be beautiful. They don't have to be likable. They don't have to be brilliant or exceptional. They can be ordinary. They can be absolutely ordinary women who've got themselves into a mess, or who are, struggling with something in their past, or just living their life. They don't have to be extraordinary. And that's rather good, actually, to see. And they aren't just a beautiful naked dead body on the page.
I'm glad you said that thing about the likable, because it's always seemed to me that's one of those things that people just repeat and accept without really thinking about it. It's really not important at all. I mean, I really learned that from John Grisham, of all people. One of his early books was called The Runaway Jury. And there was all this theory about how do you create suspense, and you've got to have these likable characters that are in some kind of peril. And that book totally blew that out of the water, because there were no likable characters in that book. There were bad guys and worse guys, and you couldn't like any of them, but you were just utterly driven by the simple question, what will the verdict be? What will happen? And so, likable is, I think people waste a lot of time trying to make characters attractive in a way that is completely unnecessary. All they got to be is interesting. And their circumstances have got to be compelling. That's all you need, and you did that so well in this book, because of course they're all flawed. I mean, like all of us, they have 10 sides to them, some of which are more attractive than others, and so on. But they're real people, and I think that's what readers actually respond to is characters that seem real, like you could meet them.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's useful to have someone to root for, but you don't actually have to admire them. They're not running for office. You're not seeing them at their best here anyway. These are people who are in very difficult situations. None of us will appear at our best in these situations. They are back to the wall. They're fighting for their lives, or they're struggling to clear their name, or what have you. Those are not the best situations in which to meet people. So, but I think you have to just feel something, as you said, there's some sort of reality, there's a grit under the skin that you can recognize, and some things that you can identify. It is that thing of identifying as, oh yes, I kind of know that person. I've met someone like that, or I've met someone who has that kind of trait, and that kind of thing. Then once you've got that kind of connection, I think it's one of the big things that happened to the girl on the train, that a lot of people saw a little bit of Rachel, either in themselves or in someone they knew. There's a connection there, and it's that is compelling, and it's that makes you want to read on and follow this person to the end of the earth.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that about the girl on the train. I'm not a girl, but I absolutely thought, I could be her. It wasn't much of a leap to put myself in that situation. So the universality is critical, I think, and in a way, that's the gender acceptance, that if you can, this is simply a character. It's not a woman character necessarily. No. It is just a character. And I did particularly note that the victim in this is a man, which is about time, as you said. In the old days, the women characters were either to be the victim, or they were to, in the last quarter of the plot, they sprain their ankle and need rescuing, which adds to the problems. And, thank God we've moved on from that.
Yeah. I mean, we do have a male victim in this case. And I mean, I'm aware that generally I too have written about women being victims, and actually, statistically, women are far less likely to be victims of crime than men are. I tend to write about sort of domestic family situations gone wrong. So that if that is the area where if women are going to get themselves into trouble, that tends to be it. But yeah, statistically, the victims of crime are overwhelmingly young men. So, and that is just not reflected in the way we write about it. So I think that is something people are thinking a lot more about the way we talk, just the way we talk about victims anyway, giving the victims a bit more, fleshing them out a bit more. So they're not just a body on a page. They are a person too.
They are, and that's similar in the US, that there is tremendous. In London, it's knife crime typically because the laws make it difficult to have access to firearms in the numbers required. But Chicago, it's shooting, New York, and so on, and it is a particular demographic that is largely male. But talking to, I mean, maybe your experience as a journalist informs this too. But when I talk to my friends who are cops or law enforcement people, you would think they have access to stories that would be great for novels, but actually not really, because real life crime of that nature tends to be so squalid and so banal that there really isn't a story there in terms of the particular individuals involved. Do you find that? I mean, would you ever write about gangs of youths with knives, or is that just not interesting?
I think I am particularly interested in sort of the domestic spirits and family relationships, marital relationships, those kind of relationships, how those go wrong. I find that's the thing that I find most compelling, is how the people that you love, that you should love, that you should be close to, how those relationships go badly wrong. I think there are plenty of people who write brilliant fiction about that's set in sort of more criminal fraternities, because I think there is really interesting stuff to write about that. Because it's, again, for me, what would be interesting is how people fall into that, how they get drawn into situations that they then find it difficult to escape. Again, for me, as it would be the how you get there rather than the actual crimes themselves, which, as you say, I think are pretty banal and come out of desperation or warring factions and gangs and that kind of thing, which is, I guess, on the surface of it, not that complicated. But I do think it's the reasons that people end up in those situations are complicated. The how people get to that is complicated, but it's not something that I have really. I feel like I have the sort of mind that works that way. I'm more interested, as I said, in the domestic sphere.
I'm fascinated by that too. And what I've noticed over my lifetime is that the kind of structure and loyalty and protection that a gang gives you in my youth was replicated by working. You would work in a mass workforce that was unionized. And the whole same thing, the hierarchies, the loyalty one to the other. You might hate the guy you work with, but if there was an industrial dispute, you stood shoulder to shoulder. And those elements of belonging and identity and value disappeared when mass industrial employment disappeared. And it's almost as if gangs are supplying that need, especially in young men. They need to belong. They need to feel part of something. And now they have to create it for themselves in ways that are largely negative.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's the stuff that, for those who know about it, that's the stuff I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, but it's really more of a sort of sociological historical essay than a novel. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I don't know if McKenna
Are
has
we
questions.
getting to the, yeah.
Do we have questions yet, McKenna, from the audience? Because we're keen to, if people want to know something, obviously, yeah, we're keen to answer, but let us know how that's going.
We do have a question, and if anyone else has questions, they can certainly put those in the questions section. So we have a question from Michelle. Hi, Paula and Lee from Canada. Paula, what came first for you with this new book, plot or characters, and when did the title fall into it?
That's a great question. Thank you. For me, I always start with character, and in this case, I started with the character of Laura. I talked a bit about her in this conversation. So she's someone I've been thinking about who had an accident as a child, and as a result has some behavioural problems, which means that she's constantly sort of bouncing from one. She's sort of firefighting. She bounces from one job to the next, from one relationship to the next. She never seems to be able to settle on anything. And I really wanted to write about her, but I wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I'd been doing lots of walking on the canal near where I live, looking in these houseboats, imagining things going on in there. Most of the houseboats are really beautiful. They've got nice pot plants on them and solar panels on the roof. Every now and again, you'll find one that's sort of sinking into the water a bit, and it looks like it hasn't been touched for sort of months, possibly years. And it did strike me that if one wanted to stash a body, that might not be a bad place. So that was sort of where I started with it. And so I combined these two things. I put Laura onto a boat, blood on her hands, body at her feet, and then started to go from there. And that's kind of how that was the first idea that came to me in the actual, and then the plot sort of built slowly around that. As for the title, that came much later, actually. I had many sort of working titles going on. But then I read this piece. It was on a literary blog. It was about how old books degrade. And basically, so slow fire refers to the process by which the acid in paper starts to eat it on the inside. And if you have really old books, you'll find that sometimes the edges, they almost look like they've been burnt. They go brittle and they start to crumble away. Anyway, so basically the seed of the destruction of the book is within it. And that struck me as like the perfect metaphor for the characters in this novel, most of whom are carrying something inside them that is very destructive, guilt or shame or lust for vengeance or whatever it is. They are carrying something inside them that has the potential to destroy them. So it was one of those serendipitous discoveries. And I was thinking, oh yes, that's perfect title for this book.
It is a great title. Before I forget, I also just want to mention that any of you who are watching who are also big Lee Child fans, we do have an event confirmed for his next book. Let me just, my screen went dark as I mentioned it. Okay, so Lee and Andrew will be doing an event on October 29th for the new Jack Reacher novel, and we will also have signed copies. So they're going to be officially announcing the tour, I guess, in September, but we were given a go-ahead and mention that it's happening for today's event. We have another question. Lindsay was wondering, what is the last book that both of you read that you highly recommend? And why don't we start with Lee?
God, that's an awful question, because the responsibility of saying that, you recommend it. And I'm also terrible with titles. I would say the last one that I read that I would unequivocally recommend is Don Winslow's new one. And I'm going to have to try and peer. I can't even read the title up from this distance. But whatever the new Don Winslow is, I think that guy is exceptionally good.
And it was just postponed, I think, till the spring because he wants to do a tour, and with COVID, the stops that he had scheduled all wound up being canceled. So I think they actually just postponed that book, but it'll be out, I think, in March, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. Yeah. And then the other guy that I really love at the moment is Michael Kurita, who I happened to catch his movie with Angelina Jolie. I saw it on the TV the other night, and it really, the movie was great, but the movie is never as good as the book, and I do remember that book so well. There's just, I'm a reader. I just love reading, and in my head, yeah, there are a few terrible books that I'm sorry that I wasted the time on, but almost all of them I enjoy and I love, and you learn something, even if it's a medium book, you learn something from it, and even if it's a bad book, you learn something from it, and if it's a great book, you're just in such ecstasy for that day. That I mean, actually, you mentioned the event that we're doing on October 29th. That's my birthday. And when I look back, that's going to be like more than 60 years since I learned to read. And I just love reading. I still do. So I'm a bad person to ask for recommendations because I say all of them.
Yeah, I think the Karita book you were talking about is Those Who Wish Me Dead. That's the one that was made into the movie, but he's also writing those kind of suspense horror books under Scott Carson, and those are really good too. So he's doing good things. How about you, Paula?
I have read lots of great things recently, but I think the two I'm going to mention are Laura Lippman, Dream Girl, which I thought was absolutely amazing, and Megan Abbott's Turnout, which I absolutely loved. I know well, we mentioned Megan earlier. Yeah. I absolutely love her, and both those writers, both of those are women who write just incredibly compelling, rich, atmospheric, sort of noir that I could live in that world. I absolutely love it. So those are my two top recommendations for crime fans. Wonderful.
I just got the Laura Lippman yesterday.
You'll love it. It's amazing. It's so clever.
I love Laura. She's a great series that she does, but also sensational standalones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And absolutely a star. Yeah.
So we have this one lady, Susan, who watches a lot of our events. She's not on here today because it's a ticketed event, but she watches a lot of our Facebook events, and she every time asks a question that now I love asking. So if you had to put together a dinner party with 3 authors, alive or dead, who would you invite to your dinner party? And Paula, you guys can alternate if you want to think this out, however you want to do it. But let's start with you, Paula.
Okay. I tell you what, I bet you could ask me this question every day and I have a different answer every time.
Sure, I'm sure.
But since you've sprung this on me,
yes,
I am going to say Kate Atkinson, who's one of my favorites. She writes literary fiction and crime fiction here in the UK. I would love to have Nora Ephron. She could do the cooking and she could make us laugh. And I think then maybe, and this is kind of a risky choice because she's not the easiest person in the world, but I'll go for Patricia Highsmith, even though it might be a bit scary.
Someone the other night said Patricia Highsmith also, and I thought that is a bit of a risky choice. Yeah. But I am a huge Kate Atkinson fan as well, so I'm glad you chose her. I think, and Nora Ephron, I feel like would have enough humor to round out the group. So
I think so. Yeah, it's sit Nora next to Patricia, and so perfect.
Exactly. How about Julie?
I might go for Nora's sister, Hallie Ephron, because she's a great mystery writer and a real fun person. And also she can tell you the truth about Nora behind her back. That would be very cool. Patricia Highsmith, absolutely. I mean, and I felt tinges of that with Paula's book, The Slow Fire Burning. I felt there was a bit of Barbara Vine in there and a bit of Patricia Highsmith somehow. And so Barbara Vine, Ruth Rendell, I have actually had dinner with her. We were guests of honor together in at a conference in Las Vegas. And what I really remember about it is that she arrived and wanted to have a bath. And so she started to run her bath and she couldn't stop the faucet from running. And rather than call the desk or, housekeeping, she called me. I don't know why, because we were like two British people, guests of honor together or something. So I went up to Ruth Rendell's room, and she was standing there with a towel on, and I had to screw her bath tap shut. So yeah, we could have dinner and talk about that. The other one, of course, that I would love to just talk to for a moment would be William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Because what I find is, I've been doing this 25 years, and probably 10 times during those 25 years, I've done a sentence or a line that just gives you a wonderful sense of euphoria. You just know you've nailed it. And you have this wonderful feeling. And I've averaged one of those feelings about once every 2.5 years. And Shakespeare, damn him, he must have been having that feeling like 10 times every morning. And I would like to ask him, how did that feel, pal?
Sounds great. Sounds like a good dinner party on your end also. I think that we are done. We don't have any other questions. Again, if you tuned in late, we'll be sending out the private YouTube link for this recording. We'll be sending it to Watermark and Left Bank also so that they can pass it on to their customers. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Paula. As always, it was wonderful chatting with you two and seeing you and listening to you talk. And all best to you. I think I'm just gonna
Thank you so much.
End it.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations on the great book, Paula, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, McKenna.
Thank you, Lee.